Red for artillery, light blue for infantry, and yellow for cavalry. By the time of the American Civil War, there was already a long history of competition between these army branches. During the fall of 1861, over 10,000 Union recruits assembled at Camp Calhoun, Kentucky. They were there to train for war while protecting Green River Lock and Dam No. 2 from the Confederates. No. 3 had already been captured, so Camp Calhoun was where an entire Union division mustered into the Army. There was the artillery. They learned to pound fixed positions and to use their cannon as a huge shotgun to mow down advancing infantry. The sound, smoke, and sulfuric smell draped over the battlefield. The infantry trained to march shoulder to shoulder into hostile fire while reloading their weapons. They cooked their own meals and walked 10 to 15 miles a day in any and all kinds of weather. Then there was the cavalry. They trained to be responsible for both themselves and a horse, to ride behind enemy lines and test the parameters of his position. They sometimes met enemy cavalry doing the same thing. On December 28, 1861, a patrol left Camp Calhoun and stopped to water their horses about 10 miles south, near Sacramento. Two rebel sympathizers, teenage sisters, spotted the Union patrol. Sarah Moorhead went to warn her father, while Molly Moorhead raced off to alert nearby Confederate cavalry. Molly's information gave the rebels an edge. The 400 Yankees were commanded by Major Eli Murray of Cloverport. When the war ended 3.5 years later, he was one of the youngest brigadier generals in the Union Army. Later, he was governor of Utah. But on that day, 18-year-old Major Murray faced 300 Confederate troopers commanded by one of the richest men in the South, Nathan Bedford Forrest of Memphis. Neither Murray nor Forrest had benefit of formal military education. These two untested commanders would lead men in battle for the first time at Sacramento. This event has been marked annually for 20 years on a portion of the original battlefield. The town and reenactors are dedicated to preserving the nuances of the Civil War era.
Still the same saddles. The thing about the Confederacy, when they first started, which is pretty reasonable to understand, they didn't have the infrastructure yet and all the equipment to put their soldiers on horseback.
Right.
They would use Jennings saddles, plantation saddles, pretty much anything that was light enough that they could get a hold of, and brought their own horses. And the unusual thing is the Confederate South, the South, was much better horsemen as a whole than the North, because they grew up on farms. They had to travel back and forth great distances.
Would that stop a bullet?
Well, believe it or not, no. This is actually, from my understanding, this goes back to the time for the knights. when the knights would have their crest on the front of their horse or on their shield. And this was kind of like a transcend down through time to represent that. Now, most of the time, this wasn't on a trooper saddle. This was generally for officers only. And it was, of course, it's brass, so it's more expensive, so they didn't give it. But you would have the leather, which is basically a heart-shaped triangle. And this was pretty much like more decoration.
McClellan, which is pretty much typical of basically a Union saddle, and if a real full Federals, this is mostly what they wear. Confederates have a little bit of everything, the Jennifer saddle or whatever they had at home, but the McClellan is pretty much a standard cavalry saddle. You can see it's a little different than the Army 1904, even though that's what this really is. The 04 was covered with leather. These are stripped down to the rawhide, and you have the side skirts, and the cinches are a little bit different. I mean, usually there's several different types of saddlebags you'll see them wearing. Let's see here. Halters. Everything's leather. And we try to keep away from modern equipment. See if anybody's got one of their bits around. Here's a typical cavalry bridle. You see U.S. Federals, of course, would be issued this stuff. They would have the U.S. markings and stuff. The Confederacy may have it, they may not, because the Confederates used whatever they could get. Captured equipment, what they brought from home. So there's lots of different things. We cheat a little bit. A lot of times, especially out here, we use a regular pad and just cover them with a blanket. Back then, they actually used their blankets as their pads. So they folded them up, put them under their saddles. At nighttime, they used them for themselves.
Right.
This is the typical, the blue with the orange stripe was a typical cavalry blanket. And they're roughly the 60 by 80. It's wool, so that's what you would see.
Obvious thing is, we had the blue woolen blanket, the red stripe. During the first part of the war, a lot of the equipment was exactly the same because a lot of the guys from the Confederacy left the Union Army to go fight for the South.
And what is that?
This is like a wool or cotton blend webbing, and it's pretty thick, pretty solid, almost like a canvas. And then they would attach the leather to the ends, and then they would be able to save leather in between the two. You could use end pieces to make this part, put straps through it, and put rivets in there and stitching. This is your girth strap.
When Molly Moorhead alerted Lieutenant Colonel Forrest and battle was imminent, she attempted to join the fight. Fortunately, she was persuaded otherwise before any harm came to her. Forrest gathered his forces, then used dismounted sharpshooters to attack both flanks. He led a charge through the center, forcing the Union scouting party back on its heels. It was Forrest's first use of tactical instincts he would use well and often throughout the war. Forrest became known as the Wizard of the Saddle, and Sacramento became the birthplace of mobile warfare tactics, tactics that are still studied and used with mechanized vehicles and aircraft today. Two future generals fought at Sacramento, Kentucky. Murray earned his star leading part of General Sherman's cavalry on the famous March to the Sea. Nathan Bedford Forrest became a three-star general and arguably the best cavalry leader on either side during the Civil War. The cavalry reenactment at Sacramento has grown to become the largest in Kentucky. In 2013, the Century Division Order of the Spur established an award and presented it for the first time. The Order of the Spur is dedicated to preserving cavalry heritage, and part of this mission is recognizing excellence in those with the same goal.
There were 10,000 Yankees garrisoned at the dam. For he who holds the river is he who holds the land. If Lincoln lost Kentucky, could be lose some more. So the troops at Calhoun started out the war. The rebel sisters Morehead lived not far to the south, like Lady Paul Revere's. They wrote warning word of mouth. Somali went riding with a word to the wise. Said there's a Yankees up ahead and there's gonna be a fight.